Tommy Smith with Rattle and Hum Sports, RandHSports.com. We're here tonight to bring you our Week 6 Big 12 football report. With me to do so, as always, is Matthew Postins. Matthew is the editor of College Football America. He is the publisher for RandHSports.com and our chief of Big 12 football contributor. Matthew, how are you tonight?
I'm fine, and thank you for the extended intro. That concludes our podcast. Good night.
Thanks for joining us as always, Matthew. We really appreciate all the insight that you bring to RandHSports.com. We had a big week for Week 5 in the conference. We had a big Monday today. We'll get to some of that in a minute. Let's look back at the games from Week 5 and 3 very high-scoring games that we saw. That's this morning on the coaches call, a little bit about the defenses in the Big 12 or the offenses in the Big 12, in whichever way you want to look at it. What do you make of the defense in the Big 12?
Well, I don't think it's so much that the defenses are bad as much as it is the offenses are just really good. Mm-hmm. I mean, a couple of the coaches made the point that in this conference, when you have as many good quarterbacks as they have in this league, it's really hard to slow them down. A lot of the teams play at tempo. A lot of the teams play at pace now. So you have teams that are getting 18, 19, or games that are 18, 19 possessions long as opposed to 11 or 12 possessions long like they used to be. So you're seeing teams rack up more points, more yards, and that's why you're seeing the higher scoring games. Mm-hmm. You know, Gary Patterson made a good point. You know, they're averaging 417 yards in total defense in terms of yardage, and for him, that's unacceptable. But in the Big 12, that's 6th in the conference. So It's almost the norm right now in terms of what teams are giving up defensively.
Yeah, it's just difficult to play defense in a conference that throws the ball around so much. And I think that starts with you and I are talking, going all the way back to high school football in the state of Texas and the number of just outstanding quarterbacks that you have in the conference. So we had the OU victory over TCU. Mm-hmm. Baylor squeaks out a win. West Virginia, again, squeaks out a win. They're kind of at the top of the conference. Do we know who the best school is in the Big 12?
I don't think we do yet. I mean, I think you can make a guess that it's Oklahoma. I think they've kind of righted the ship a little bit after that 1-2 start. But, you know, Bill Snyder made the point during the call today that he kind of feels like there are 7 teams in the league that could be in this at the very end. Mm-hmm. He made the point that you really can't see the bottom in this league, and it's really hard to see who's on top. So, you know, we're nearly halfway through the season, and you know, to me, nobody's really asserted themselves as that favorite. I mean, I know we all had Oklahoma installed there at the beginning of the season, and they certainly had their struggles the first 3 weeks of the season, but I still don't see them necessarily as being head and shoulders above anybody right now. So it's anybody's ball game right now in the Big 12.
And it'll play itself out as the round robin format plays itself out as we move through the season. Let's look ahead to games coming up Week 6. First of all, and we'll talk a little bit more about the implications of this morning's news that came out of Austin, but the big one is the Red River Rivalry between Texas and Oklahoma. Charlie Strong this morning announcing that he would be taking over the defensive responsibility, defensive play calling. Vance Bedford would become secondary coach. What do you make out of the news that came from Austin this morning?
Well, you know, Charlie tried during the bye week to get this team better positioned to play defense, decided not to make the coordinator change, really felt like it came down to scheme and execution and getting guys to play more fundamentally. It didn't work against Oklahoma State because they still had defensive breakdowns. They had 3 extra points blocked, which apparently hasn't happened in an FBS game since 2004. I actually thought I saw it in a Rice-UCLA game a few years ago, but apparently I was incorrect on that. But that Texas team wasn't prepared to play. Right. And that really falls on Charlie Strong, to be perfectly honest with you. But right now, since their offense is actually moving the football and they're scoring points, unlike last year, it really falls on the defense now. Because the defense, if they were playing just a little bit better, this Texas team might be 4-0.
Yeah.
So it really falls on Charlie Strong now. And he's putting the responsibility on himself to figure out what's wrong with this defense, get them in the right positions they need to be to win. And I thought there was a writer, I can't remember his name, made a really good point today. There's nobody left for Charlie Strong to blame. Right. Nobody else for him to demote, nobody else for him to fire. For the next 8 games, it's all on him. If he wants to save his job, his defense has to play better, and he has to be responsible for it.
You know, SI had started running a story. We started seeing some news that maybe the decision had been made to go ahead and part ways with Charlie Strong at the end of the season. Now that decision obviously was not made today.
No.
But how does all of this affect that Texas program?
Well, you hate to have a cloud like this lingering around your program, and I'm guessing that's probably why LSU went ahead and fired Les Miles when it did, because they probably didn't want these kinds of reports to get out there. This impacts a lot of different things going on at UT right now, not just Charlie Strong's job security, the job security of his entire coaching staff. It affects the recruiting class for next year. It affects the coaching search, because you sometimes these little reports get out there not necessarily because the school doesn't want them out there, because there are a couple of great coaching candidates out there right now, and Les Miles, of course, but also Tom Herman at Houston. Sometimes these stories get leaked as a kind of a nod and a wink to that potential candidate to say, you know what, hey, we wouldn't mind talking to you after the season's over if we decide to make a change.
Right.
So, it's unfortunate, because Charlie Strong's only been there 2.5 years, and there's nobody that, in my opinion, he's underachieved a little bit. I also think he's built up that program quite a bit and brought in quite a bit of talent. And I'm of the mind that a head coach at the college level should always get 4 years to fully install their program, go through a full recruiting cycle before you determine their future. But Texas is different, just like Alabama's different, just like USC's different, just like Michigan's different. And the heat is coming from boosters, a couple in particular that their names, and those who are really tight around the program. They've got a new athletic director who really isn't a athletic director steeped AD. He's more of a businessman. He's just there as a placeholder until they make the right call on the AD front. So there's a lot of moving parts right now at Texas, and Charlie Strong can only control what he can do on the field, and for him, moving into that defensive coordinator spot will probably take some of his focus away from all that external stuff and move it back to the field.
It was a big win last year over Oklahoma that really kind of settled things down for him and cooled the hot seat. He's definitely going to need a victory over Oklahoma, I think, again, if we're going to have any of this talk calm down going forward through the rest of the season. But let's talk about Oklahoma. They picked up a big win against TCU on Saturday night. Is Oklahoma fixed going forward? Or?
I think they're close to being fixed. I mean, the offense got back to what it does best, and I kind of said this last week. They need to get back to running the ball. They did a very good job of that with P. Ryan and Mixon. Mixon had 2 touchdowns. P. Ryan got over 100 yards. They even got Baker Mayfield into the mix running the football and some design stuff. He scored twice. He looked much more comfortable in the pocket, and I thought a really telling part of that game was when he gave up the ball on the fumble at the beginning of the game, came right back, and led Oklahoma down the field to score. There was none of the shaky play that we saw after he fumbled against Houston and after he made mistakes against Ohio State. So I think the mental aspect in terms of Baker Mayfield, I think he's past that. I think he's in much better shape. Defensively, they forced TCU into 3 and outs on 4 of their 6 possessions in the second and third quarter. They had some real holes defensively at the end of the game, but they're showing that they can get stops and get teams off the field. They've just now got to extend that to 4 quarters.
Yeah, they really took over in the second and third quarter, shut TCU down in that ball game. Anything else about the Red River Rivalry? I'll get that right at some point that you'd like to talk about before we move on.
Just that Bob Stoops talked about it during the call today. He felt like his Oklahoma team got out physical last year by Texas. And, really when you get into a rivalry game like this, along with the cliches of throwing out their record, a lot of times the winning team is the one who's more physical than the other. So, you look at Oklahoma, you look at Texas, I still think Texas can out-physical them. I still think they've got enough talent to do that. I think the real question is going to be whether or not Oklahoma can get off to a good start and hang on to it and put Texas into a position where they have to do things they don't want to do, as in put the ball in the hands of Shane Buechele a little bit more late in the game. Texas would love to be able to continue to run the ball the way they've been able to. I mean, Deontay Foreman and Chris Warren both had over 100 yards against Oklahoma. That wasn't the problem on Saturday. But if they can control the clock and control the offense the way they want to, that puts Oklahoma in some positions where they may have to press.
Should be always interesting. It's always close game. It's a rivalry.
Yeah.
We'll have to see after 11 o'clock on Saturday what transpires at the Cotton Bowl. Moving on, Texas Tech is going to take on Kansas State, and I'm going to give you the honors of pronouncing the quarterback's name, Nick
Shimanek.
Tell us who Nick Shimanek is.
As we found out on the call today, he is a former Texas high school quarterback, went to Iowa, was recruited there. Iowa doesn't necessarily play at pace. They play a little more methodical offense. So after he really didn't get any traction trying to get the starting job there, he transferred to Texas Tech. In fact, Tech's former chancellor actually gave his name to Cliff Kingsbury, saying, hey, this kid's interested in coming down. Of course, he's been sitting on the pine the last few years, especially with the rise of Patrick Mahomes. But now that Mahomes has the sprained AC joint and may not play on Saturday, it would fall to Shimanek to be the starting quarterback when they face Kansas State.
Yeah. Have we gotten any update this morning? I heard Coach Kingsbury say he had no update really on Patrick Mahomes. We know it's an AC joint.
Yeah.
Any word on his condition?
No, he said it's going to be a day-to-day thing. I mean, we might hear more from Kingsbury later in the week as he talks to the media out in Lubbock, but right now he's playing it pretty close to the vest. Sprained AC joint, I doubt seriously Mahomes plays, especially since it's to his throwing shoulder. So I would expect to see Shimanek at quarterback on Saturday.
Well, that'll make things awful interesting, and brings us to the next thing we want to talk about, was the K-State offense. Especially if Texas Tech is playing with a backup quarterback and they're not scoring as many points, why is it important or not so important for K-State's offense to be so productive?
Because their defense is really good, and that's kind of a hallmark and a trademark of Bill Snyder coach team. I mean, you look at K-State's offensive members; they're some of the worst in the conference. It's just a matter of they don't have the quarterback play at the level of some of the other teams in the conference. If they did, like when they had Colin Klein a few years ago, they'd be right in this mix. But their defense is so good at slowing these teams that play at pace and spread it out. They did it against West Virginia last weekend. They held them to 17 points, even though they lost that game. It was a big step for Kansas State in terms of showing they can be competitive with the rest of the what I consider to be the upper echelon teams in the conference. So if there's any coach in any unit that can slow down this Texas Tech offense with a backup quarterback, it's Bill Snyder. And while Texas Tech will certainly be the favorite going into that game, even though it's a road game for them, I could see Kansas State, putting a win up on Saturday.
Okay. The last game I guess we'll mention is the TCU-Kansas game. TCU pitched, Gary Patterson obviously not happy about the loss. He was very impressed with the way his team fought back in that game against Oklahoma. He says his games against Kansas are always tough games for him. There is some hope that they might get Kevontae Turpin back, but they've had some young guys step up in his place, and let's talk a little bit about them.
Yeah, you know what? The last 2 weeks against SMU and Oklahoma, they've had three young wide receivers kind of step into that void and be the kinds of playmakers that Turpin was, at least on offense. I don't think you can really replace him as a return guy. But offensively, Taj Williams has had two very good games back-to-back now for TCU. You've got the Arce, John D'Arce, who had a very good game against SMU. Only had one catch against Oklahoma, but I think Oklahoma made more of an effort to shut him down.
Sure.
And you have Jalen Austin, who had two touchdown receptions against Oklahoma, had a big game against them. That's going to make this offense that much more dangerous when Kevontae Turpin comes back. And I was of the mind that Turpin might be gone for quite some time. He may not be necessarily. We saw him on the sideline Saturday. No crutches this time, no brace this time from what I could tell. Gary Patterson kind of alluded to the fact that he hopes they might have him back in a couple of weeks. So you get Turpin back in that offense. Not only does he impact the return game, but you throw him in there with these receivers that are starting to really produce, and that TCU offense becomes really, really dangerous.
And as we talk, they're TCU by no means is out of this race.
No, they're not.
Oklahoma's obviously in it, and I did do this again last week. we do have one more game to talk about, and that involves another team that's right in the thick of this thing with one loss, and that's the Oklahoma State Cowboys as they play host to Iowa State. Talk a little bit about that game. Iowa State's got they're going to stick with Joe Lane. But what do you see, out of the Iowa State and Oklahoma State matchup?
And they should stick with him because he had a really good game. It was the first game this season where the quarterback got all the reps in a game for Iowa State. And I watched a good portion of that game before I went to the TCU game, and he played very well. And I know that the folks at Iowa State were very impressed with what they saw out of him, and he should carry that forward next week. But Matt Campbell is just as impressed with the fact that they think they found a combination up front on the offensive line.
Yeah.
The Baylor game was the first time this season where they had the same 5 guys in the same 5 spots in consecutive games, and he really thinks that's making a difference in Iowa State's running game. Mike Warren got over 100 yards for the second straight game. This was a guy who could barely get on track the first couple games of the year against Northern Iowa and Iowa. Really, Iowa State was able to do some things offensively last year because Mike Warren was able to help them move the football in the run game. If they can get back to that these next couple of games, they're going to be much harder to deal with. I mean, you saw what Baylor's problems were. They had a hard time dealing with them from a defensive standpoint until the fourth quarter of that game on Saturday. Oklahoma State's got a solid defense, but I think Iowa State can go in and do some things against the Cowboys on Saturday. Oklahoma State, I kind of feel like they're one of the teams that are still in this race, even though they have one loss against Baylor. Mason Rudolph may be playing some of the best quarterback in the conference right now. His last 2 games have been tremendous. They've gotten him a little more involved in the running game now. Of course, he's got some great weapons in James Washington and those guys in the backfield. But he looks as comfortable as I've seen him look in the time that he's been the starter at Oklahoma State, and that's a big deal in that offense because if there's any team that has pioneered the offensive revolution in this conference, it's Oklahoma State and head coach Mike Gundy.
Certainly, and I agree with you. I think Oklahoma State is definitely going to have something to say about whoever goes on to win this conference. We should mention bye weeks this week. Baylor, West Virginia are not playing this week. They both have byes. Before we wrap up, anything that we've left out, and then we'll get your picks.
Well, Baylor is going to spend this week trying to clean up some of that some of those defensive breakdowns they had against Iowa State. But one thing that's interesting is they've played 5 games this year and they haven't given up a single point in the fourth quarter. So this Baylor defense has given up some yardage and they've given up some points, but they seem to have really been able to get it done in the fourth quarter. And Jim Grove attributed that really to the team's conditioning more than anything else. He feels like they don't have a lot of particularly big guys on defense, but they're in really good shape and they're able to sustain that going into the fourth quarter. As for West Virginia, Dana Holgerson was happy about the win against Kansas State, even though they only had 11 possessions in that game total between both teams, which is just crazy when you consider how many possessions are in games nowadays.
Especially in the conference.
In this conference. He was happy with the way they went ugly. They didn't move the ball well at times. They missed some opportunities on offense. They played well enough on defense to win. And really for him, that's the second straight week in a row where the stat sheet hasn't looked like it's been in West Virginia's favor.
Hey, this is Tommy Smith with Rattle and Hum Sports, RandHSports.com. We are here with week 6 of our Big 12 football report. Joining me as always is Matthew Postins. Matthew, how are you tonight?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's been quite an interesting day, and we'll get to some of the big news that broke this morning from just after the coaches' conference call. But let's look back a little bit at week 5, Matthew, in the conference. 3 very high-scoring games that we saw, and there were some questions this morning about defenses in the Big 12. What do you make of what's going on the defensive side of the ball in the conference?
Well, Gary Patterson from TCU made a good point about the fact that they gave up 417 yards in total offense to Oklahoma, or they're averaging this year so far giving up 417 yards per game offensively. And he said for him that's not good enough, but really in the conference that's the norm right now, because you have all of these offenses that play at tempo, who have great quarterbacks, who rack up tons of yards and tons of points. It's not necessarily that the defenses are bad. It's just that the offenses are so good, it's so hard to slow them down. We were at the TCU-Oklahoma game on Saturday, and they ended up putting up nearly 100 points combined in that contest, close to 1,000 yards in total offense. It was the same at Baylor, Iowa State. It was the same at Oklahoma State and Texas. I mean,
I want to start over real quick. Sorry, 'cause if it's too hot, it'll turn off, and it did, and
Okay,
but we only, I mean, it's only like 2 minutes.
okay. You're
Sorry.
fine.
I just, yeah.